Welcome, everybody, to the F4 Hunger Awareness Show.
It's my goal to feed 1 billion people before I die.
We want to bring awareness around the issue of hunger and food insecurity.
7 to 8 million people served so far. With the sole goal of eradicating world hunger by connecting sources of food to recipients in need. Fiorenza's Food for Friends.
Hello, everyone. I'm Derek Fiorenza with the F4 Hunger Awareness Show, joined by my co-host.
Isabella Ambrosino.
And we have a very exceptional guest with us today. It's Dr. Julie Dietrich, and she is the Executive Director for the Office of External Relations at West Chester University. There's a lot to get into today, Dr. Dietrich. I want to cover your background, kind of how you got started in academia, and then also some of your philanthropic ventures. So if you don't mind, kind of give us a starting point, how you got your career started.
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I greatly appreciate it. I'm excited this morning to join you both. And born and raised, so a native of Westchester, long history at Westchester University in my family. Great grandmother taught there for over 30 years. Ramsey Hall was named after her. So I really grew up on and around the campus. My father went there. My grandmother, two of my three sisters. So really, Westchester University in particular has been close to my family and my upbringing. And so that academic piece maybe was particularly strong, as I noted there. So really, I think a lot of when I think of my background in terms of growing up here in Westchester, right near Henderson High School, and also thinking of how we were raised, right? So again, the oldest of four girls, and watching my parents do a lot of service, and I think getting into my studies, I'll skip here up a little bit to my studies in college around philosophy. And little did I know that some of my more deep conversations, particularly with my father, who had been a philosophy major, it wasn't that there was some grand plan or any particular intent. Actually, I started as a nutrition major. I was going to become a registered dietitian. In addition to wanting to be a fashion designer from the time I was 9 and some artistic interests that I continue to have. So I think, upon reflection, having some of those conversations and genuine, just innate sense of curiosity, whether it was about religion and God, and sometimes it'd be a joke of, oh, Julie's back in the back porch talking to your father, so eventually they would just close the door because there would be these rather deep conversations. So I was really, I found, that when I took my first intro to philosophy class, Professor Binyavsky, this tiger that would pace back and forth, and he was always so incredibly inspiring and passionate. And taking that first class and opening the Intro to Philosophy book, and I thought I found home. I was like, this is me. Like, this fits. And, you would read something, you're like, okay, that totally makes sense. Like theories of knowledge, or whether it's like empiricism or rationalism or what have you. And then you'd read the next philosopher and the next perspective, and you're like, but that made sense too. So how did that make sense? And then this made sense. So in terms of some of your values and those foundational beliefs, right? It took like dynamite blew up and I'm like, okay. And I feel so blessed for that, because then it was that building back of, what do you believe? Why do you believe it? Right. And so it was really incredible. And then I did my master's. And to help pay for it, I became a graduate assistant at the university at Westchester with, at the time, Act 101, academic development. It is a cohort of students that are educationally and or economically disadvantaged. And I bring that up because I ended up changing my doctoral program, and that was the main reason why. Because I really felt that it was such an experience as a master's student in philosophy. It wasn't about gerunds, right? Or verbs, or being able to name a pronoun or what have you, but as it was more to the point of connecting with students and the mentoring piece. And whether it was, English wasn't the student's first language or what it may be, a lot of challenges more than your average traditional student. And I really, that to this day is the most gratifying work that I've done with students. And so finishing that master's program and then starting, I'm skipping through a bit here, of
Yeah.
course. And so starting upon getting out of the master's program, I started adjunct teaching in philosophy, working other jobs, but but also, in a bookstore and figuring it out. And I remember I put applications out to teach upon my master's graduation, and I was super excited. And I called my dad. And I said, I got my first teaching job. And it was like December and it started in January, right? I literally like graduated December 20. Well, anyway, it was a while back. It wasn't 20 anything. It was 1997. But it started that, in a few weeks, essentially. And he's like, where? I'm like, Luzerne County Community College. He's like, do you know where that is? I'm like, no. He's like, it's in the Poconos. I'm like, oh.
I know where that is.
So bless him, he drove me. He's like, okay, this is what you need to do. And, so I made sure it took it, those that know where Westchester is in comparison to Luzerne County Community College in Hazleton, it was a trek. So that was certainly unique. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. And then continued my studies in philosophy, worked at Glen Mill Schools a bit, realized, nah, what am I going to do now? But so I went back because I thought I was going to convince them that I was going to teach in the classroom. And they said, as a female at Glen Mill Schools, you are not going to get in the classroom because it's for young men. And they never did that. And they made that clear. And young me thought, no, I have all this passion and energy, enthusiasm, and I really want to help. And no, that was clearly, I should have paid attention. They were being honest. That was not going to change. But to be more serious, so I went back, applied for doctoral programs, as I referenced, was in a doctoral program at Temple, working on my PhD, and one class left. And then I felt that it was understandably to be expected, quite abstract. And then I decided to go into the program at Widener University in higher education leadership because I was much more interested in less abstract and how can I more on the ground, right? Like how can I help work to have a positive impact in community? And the president at the time at Widener had been recognized by the John Templeton Foundation as a character building president, keeping civic engagement at the core of the mission there at Widener. It was, its main campus is in Chester, which is an area of great need when it comes to education. So for those reasons, however, to help pay for it, I then left my adjunct teaching, although a difficult decision, loving the students as I do, and then spent about a decade, because I honestly, to be fair, vacillated between finishing my PhD in philosophy at Temple and what I was doing with this switch at Widener. And it was a challenge for me. I struggled with that. And again, like I said, vacillated a bit. But at a certain point, I spoke to self and said, you need to make a decision. And so later than some, I finished my doctorate in fall of 2017, and this new position at Westchester opened up. But I did, despite advice of others, do my dissertation on the character development of students in higher education. So I did stick to the ethics. I did stick to really my main interest being that the character development of students, and particularly from a virtue perspective.
I have a couple questions before we dig into your role now at Westchester. First one was, can you take us through the experience of getting your doctorate, the challenges, how hard it was, what it entailed? That's the first question I have.
Uh, yes. Well, and it was extremely different. And one of the reasons in terms of like that decision making between which program, because the Doctor of Philosophy, it is so I don't know how best to describe it. I mean, I'm thinking of a couple of words, but it is very theoretical. The intellectual demands of that, they're different and they're deep. And I love that. Like, love that. I love the thinking about and the depth of the thinking about different areas because I took, existentialism, symbolic logic, philosophies and religions of India. Whereas most people, even, getting into especially in a doctoral program, you have to, at a certain point, you have to make some decisions and specialize. But philosophy translates as love of wisdom, and that's why I love it. So I kept taking, it brought, but I was actually going to do a dissertation, if it was going to be in philosophy, on the garden as an art, and focusing on aesthetics. And then I thought I could travel during my doctoral work. And whether it was in like France or, London, go to England and even like maybe, different areas within America. So to get to your question, the coursework is different. And I mean, however it sounds, I love classes. Like I love taking classes. I love learning. Like I would be interested in like, if I ever did like a second doctorate, like maybe in like botany or chemistry, like I've always, but anyhow, the so the coursework is what it is. Not to make light of that. I found challenging, particularly for me, was the research comprehensive. So we had 3 comprehensive exams. Again, all doable. And it's interesting that you bring it up because for someone that, most people were at the time were taking all 3 comps in one day, which you could do. And I'm, like certain timing and had to do things a certain way and right. And so, but I knew me and like mixed methods, like the whole research thing was, like the more deep thinking that, but the research and it doesn't necessarily grab me and it's not a strength of mine. And so I am glad, although, again, it was a bit like, what do I do with this? Do I take the 3? And I didn't. So it put me back a semester. But at that point, I thought, why jeopardize doing 3 and maybe not doing as well as I want on any of them because I'm going to be focusing on research or be able to focus like I really know I need to pass the one and then take the other 2, which they offer together. And so that's what I did. And, I actually had a professor that came to me to say, hey, can I chair your dissertation committee? That went south. Very emotional, very challenging. This professor was extremely strong in research. So I thought, wow, well, this is a compliment, very kind to have the professor actually reach out to me. Wanted to take the professor up on that offer. And I found I was twisting my study because again, that's, as I kind of alluded to was the choice of what I wanted to do my dissertation on and the character focus. And that was like, well, what is your study? Like, this is soft. Like, what are you doing? What is your study? And so I pivoted a couple times because I was trying to adjust and adapt to what she was saying and also admittedly learn. I'm like, okay, I don't know this. She knows better than I do. And it wasn't me. I was trying to fit her. And so I had to make a tough in the sense of having the conversation, I suppose, but not once I made the decision. And I went to her, I was like, I need to have another chair. I need to, move forward and identify another committee. And I did that. So again, when you ask me that, I'm like, it could have been a little easier. But then doing the dissertation work and writing that, and I mean, the writing of the dissertation took, I'd say, at least a year. Because I interviewed different university presidents in this case for mine, and then you're writing it up, and it takes a lot of time, and then you're defending, and you have to go through the whole publication process. And I say that, and as I'm listening to how I'm saying it, I would absolutely, though not deter anyone from doing it. I think it's so personally rewarding, let alone when you literally have this book at the at the end of it. But I mean, it's a bit of a like internal marathon, right? I mean, that sounds a bit dramatic to be honest, but I think you get the point. I mean, you learn a lot about yourself by going through the process. And certainly individuals are going to have various like extremely more challenging situations than I described, or perhaps a good bit lighter experience than I did. And it's going to vary on, by discipline, by a particular program, certainly by way of institution. So hopefully I didn't say too much, but
No.
answered
So,
your question.
so this period of refinement, kind of like a diamond gets refined. Do you think it's made you more effective now in your ability to articulate and communicate to people you're working with day in and day out?
Yes, but I must say, I mean, the first thing I think of in answering your question is philosophy,
Yeah.
because it really. And one of the things that I remember I would always say in teaching and telling my students at the very beginning of the class, we have the syllabus, we have the textbook, we have the lessons, and I want you to excel academically to the very best of your ability. But primarily, I want you to leave this classroom being open-minded, being more thoughtful, non-judgmental of yourself and others, right? That who you are, right, as a human was really my focus. And I think that by way of philosophy, and when you talk about communication, because philosophy is what it is, you have to be so, I mean, I remember getting remarks on my one philosophy, I want to say like a midterm or final exam, and it was like thoughtful and careful. And I was like, yes. And this was like a philosophy of language or philosophy of knowledge and or philosophy of knowledge or philosophy of language or philosophy of knowledge professor. And because you need to be so clear. And actually a bit of a joke. I mean, it's still, especially with my partner, you know, especially early on, like you're so literal. Like if I said, I'm like, yes, you said X, I believe X. Like you just have to be very clear and succinct. And there's a time for creative writing. That's not typically how I approach things. So in an email, I have learned that my being literal may seem, perhaps cold. So I've tried to, over the years go, okay, no, I'm being literal, but sensitive to the fact of how is someone potentially receiving that message. So I would go back to the philosophy more specifically, and certainly maybe the evolution of communication, that's what you're asking by way of the dissertation, but really the field of philosophy itself.
It's you almost look at philosophy as a bridge to peace. It's almost like what you're saying.
I don't, yes, I don't know how you get to peace without it. Right? And I say that because treating each other as human beings and what that means. And that really goes to the crux of what I was saying by way of focusing on character and from a virtue theory or more Aristotelian specifically perspective of, so to be clear, virtues such as empathy, compassion, loyalty, trustworthiness. So not to say it cannot be polarizing, but I think the challenge in some of this is when values, whose values? And that's where I get little, I'm not talking, like if we're talking about virtues as human beings, I think I would argue, it levels the playing field. And it's not about Democrat, Republican, or any of those types. It's being, humans. And so, yes, I'll leave it there.
No, I like that string. So I mentioned those again. It was humility. What were the ones? Compassion, empathy. What were the other ones you used?
Humility, empathy, compassion. I mean, but then there's also like resilience. But when you mention peace, I mean, right? But it's all those things. I mean, so it's,
That's my toolbox right now. You're talking, Dr. Dietrich. These are
I
all
mean,
the
I
values
mean,
I ascribe to.
I appreciate that, and that's certainly glad to hear. I mean, I think that is how we get to that,
Yeah, and
particularly globally.
global. I agree. And what's interesting is I only took a couple courses in philosophy. I had a course on French existentialism with Jean-Paul Sartre. And
Absolutely. Yep.
yeah, and I really enjoyed it. It was it was difficult to wrap my head around. But as I've gotten older, I can see how philosophy and values has such a large role in everything that we do, because everything in life is very nuanced. So your approach of saying, we need to be empathetic and compassionate, it's not about how you feel, it's about how somebody else is feeling and how, like your email, I'm cold, maybe I have to be a little bit brighter. Like I put a smiley face in my email. But like it's just the idea of like how is that person receiving it and just being thoughtful that it's not just about us communicating, it's about how they're picking it up on their end. I never thought of philosophy. I took interpersonal communication as an undergrad. I never thought of philosophy as being that bridge to peace, but it's an interesting way to think of it now. I like that analogy.
Well, it's interesting too, in that I had a colleague that I had met through one of the local Rotaries, and she followed up with me, and she's doing her PhD at a Philly university, but she's focusing on peace education. And she goes, "I remember what you were talking about with character, and I'm really curious. Like, do you want to write something together? And I have this opportunity. And what do you think about publishing here and there?" So we're actually currently working on something, and I thought like so it's the irony in your saying that, because as I was explaining to her, I'm like, oh, there's absolutely alignment between what you're focusing on, and because how do you do that without, right? And so at a time when they're literally minimize, essentially shutting down certain philosophy departments, they have and continue to do so. It's backwards, right? I would argue we actually need more of that. Or people like, well, why? What are you going to do with philosophy? And it's like, what can't you do with philosophy? I
That's
mean, to be
great.
honest,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, and even if you look at it from, if you're going to focus like workforce development and making sure that students graduate and are able to be employed and they have jobs and well-paying jobs, again, employer data shows in terms of communication, open-mindedness, how, right, those interrelation. So, and to be able to have a sense of empathy and compassion because you're dealing with different perspectives. Well, how do you deal with that sense of diversity inside of an entity as well as outside, right? Well, because again, it's about human to human.
Right. Yeah.
So
Isabella, what about like on your end? She mentioned some of those virtues, empathy and compassion. You're closer to it now. You're finishing up at Westchester. I don't know if you've taken philosophy, but what from what Dr. Dietrich is saying is kind of pulling at your heartstrings here.
So I actually took one philosophy class. It was a gen ed requirement, and I never thought I'd be interested in philosophy, like before taking the class. And I remember being in that class and thinking it was so interesting, because my professor would just ask, certain questions, and he'd have people answer with their opinions, and then he'd kind of twist it a little bit, and then it'd lead you to think of other things that you wouldn't have thought of before. And it just kind of made me think that like you have to look at things in different perspectives and you can't always just think of like your way of seeing things, if that makes sense. So that's what I really learned from philosophy and thought was very, very interesting. And just even the other things that you brought up, like compassion, and those other things. I just feel like that's, kind of like I said, thinking of other perspectives. It's also just led me to want to help people more and just, have compassion for others and all that.
Dr. Dietrich, what amazes me about Isabella is she's so young, right? She's at the very beginning of her ending of her, academic career, the first level, getting ready for a professional career, and she's so in tune with how things affect other people. There's such a deep connection to that empathy, and I don't always see that, but it's so like exciting when you do, and it ties right back into what you're saying. It's like meeting people where they're at, not forcing them to like be who we want them to be. And that's it. I guess that's philosophical in that statement. But what do you think? Do you agree?
I no, I absolutely agree. And Isabella, the way you described it, it makes sense, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of consistency with what we're because it is that it's the critical thinking. So it's very hard to, it's one thing to talk about critical thinking and then to say, well, we should, that students should have critical thinking skills. And so
Yeah.
that's why philosophy can be really critical based on, like, you just gave a very great, strong example of how you what you gained by the experience, right? And that back and forth. And like when you said twisted it a little bit, I mean, it reminds me of the way I phrase it, like similar to what I was saying, like, oh, but you believe one, like you read
Yeah.
one thing, and it's like, okay, and then you're like, and it plays with you a little bit, so to speak, right? And Derek and others have, it seems rightly so in our exchanges thus far, spoken so highly of you. And I think you need to be open to that because you could have been in the classroom and had a different perspective of what you just described.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's maybe a bit what Derek is saying is who you are and what you're about and how you took that and then, move forward with that and how that may build upon what your foundation or your values already are. So, no, I think that's certainly powerful.
Yeah, we're so proud of you, Isabella, honestly.
Thank you. No, I definitely learned a lot from philosophy. Just definitely like to be kind of more open-minded and think of things in different ways and just think deeper about certain things. Like you mentioned before, that's why you were interested in philosophy.
And I saw Isabella perked up when you said Luzerne County. Isabella, why did
Yeah,
you perk up there?
that's right by where I'm originally from. So when you said that it's very
Cool.
different there, I was like, you're right, because that's kind of why I came to school at Westchester. I wanted to get away from like the small town area. And now that I'm here, I don't really want to go back to that area. And I also took dual enrollment classes in high school at Luzerne County Community College.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, I mean, my experience was good, but
Oh, my
it was,
experience was good too. I was going to say, please, I wasn't saying anything negative about it at all. It was
I
more a
know.
distance thing in terms of the drive that I had no idea where I was going and it was out there. So please, yeah,
Did you
hopefully you
So
didn't
much,
take it any other way. It's a distance piece.
did you
But
try
in
her
terms of your
restaurant?
being able to make the connection from more
Yeah.
small to a larger, I think is what you're referencing in your situation.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to try Isabella's family's restaurant?
I doubt it though,
No.
I
because
didn't even know.
what year
Pardon me?
were you in that
Where?
area? What year were you up in that area?
Really, Isabella?
I think we talked after that,
1998.
but we weren't up there, so she definitely didn't try a restaurant.
Oh, okay.
But you'll
Yeah,
have to share, so that way, if I ever am in that area, I think
so
that would be really nice.
my parents own a restaurant called Vinny's Pizza. It's a small pizzeria, but
Wonderful.
it's in
Okay.
Berwick, so it's a little bit further out from Hazleton.
Okay.
My dad's parents are from Berwick. So it's Fiorenza's, Malatesta's, Carrabba's. They're all up in that area. And Uncle Joe and Aunt Mary used to make homemade pasta, and they would actually sell it in these sheets, and they would store it in the basement, and the pasta was fantastic.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Anyway, we could talk
Well, that
food.
would be a whole other
Yeah.
gathering, wouldn't it? Like a
Yes, we
food
could talk
fest.
food another day. So what I want to do now is I want to kind of segue because we're all about creating awareness for hunger, food insecurity, trying to make people aware of issues that are facing our society today. Because at the end of the day, we're in this together. We have a short period of time, and our philosophy is how can we shed light on issues that are important and help as many people as we possibly can. So with that as our kind of framing, our backstop, you're involved in a lot of things. I wanted to pivot to what you're doing professionally. I'll share our screen here, but maybe you can talk a little bit about your role day to day now at Westchester.
Sure. So I serve as the executive director for external relations for Westchester University. It was a new position created in spring of 2018 out of the president's office, and essentially covers two main areas: serving as the government relations officer, as well as a liaison in community. And that can be chambers of commerce, neighbors near our student union, nonprofit organizations, and working also with our Student Government Association for a couple of students in particular that sit on the Student Government Association. But then also one of the things that I think is really emblematic of our public mission at Westchester University is the Center for Community Solutions. And that is where we use university dollars to pay students to work on projects that meet community need. And it's absolutely amazing. Again, various levels in terms of, local, regional, state, federal. We've even had an international project, Eastern for Africa. And it's students recruit other students, community partners tell their community partners. So it's one thing again to say mutually beneficial partnership, but it truly is because it's an amazing opportunity for our students through experiential learning opportunities, and they're being employed, right? Um, so you see some of the areas covered there, but also to give a sense of community partners, it can be, Hearing Loss Association of Chester County. It could be the Chester County Food Bank. We have a Veterans History Project that we've worked with a couple of times with U.S. Congresswoman Christy Houlihan's office. So elected officials, nonprofits, the public sector, and we have, for example, a student currently working on a project with locally the Westchester Green team. And to the point where he attended a recent research and creative activity day on campus, also featured in a local newspaper article, good for him. And his work, he was actually leaving that event to go to a Borough of Westchester Sustainability Advisory Council meeting because his data was going to help inform the revision of one of its sustainability ordinances. I
Interesting.
mean, that's amazing, right? I mean, I think those connections and the extent to which students are able to pursue that career trajectory. I had one student in recent years that he had a graduate assistantship and asked me if he could work more hours. And we certainly tried to be equitable and fair. And I went to my supervisor and he's like, maybe 5 more hours, because again, I would want to make sure I could do that for other students. And he goes, yeah, I really think I'm going to leave my graduate assistantship. I mean, this is spot on. This is what I want to do for my career.
Wow.
And I mean, having done that and worked to help pay for, I had I called him, I had a conversation with him, like, look, I can't give you more than 5 hours. And you really, I don't know that you want to leave your graduate
Right.
assistantship, but let's see what we can do. Right. And so, but all to say, to give you at least a few examples, of recent times and currently the impact of some of those projects. And I will say with the Chester County Food Bank being, that is one of the projects as well currently.
So not every university has this. This is something that you're
No.
running at Westchester. Any student can apply, undergrad,
Yes.
graduate,
Yes.
and it's
And
how.
what we do by way of recruitment is twofold. One, every enrolled registered student has what we call a handshake account. It's a third party, it's run through our Career Development Center, and we post the opportunities on Handshake. So again, that's open to
Oh,
all students. And then we take the second part of that is taking a more targeted approach. So for example, I referenced the Veterans History Project with Congresswoman Houlihan. Well, then, I reach out to the chair of our history department. Hey, Dr. Kodosky, we have this project. It's on Handshake. This is how the student can apply. You might have a particular student or students that would be really strong candidates for this. And so it's the working internally with our friends, right, in different offices and colleagues and different faculty members. And then again, like I said, it also spreads rather well and easily through the community. And State Senator Carolyn Committa recently had a symposium, a nonprofit symposium for the arts, culture, and history to really
oh,
help support those organizations, and had asked to have the Center for Community Solutions featured as one of the again featured entities that, by way of resources. And in all fairness, she was one of the ones that helped spearhead the Center for Community Solutions.
so when did this start? Is that
2016.
okay?
And it was, I believe, when Senator Comita was then mayor and President Weisenstein at the time, and maybe some of our other university leadership. And the idea that Comita had brought to this was, if you have this university college in your backyard, so to speak, we ought to be asking, how can you leverage those resources, be working together. And so this is again, a very clear representation of walking the walk. I
Yep.
think it speaks well to our leadership, and I'm grateful for that. And I know our students and community partners are too. And then at the end of the month, we're actually going to have our what I call gratitude reception. So I started that, and we're going to do that now annually. And it's a great way of bringing everyone together and thanking them, and also the exchanges that they can have, right? Especially, let's say if we have more locally speaking. Good number of projects in Coatesville, well, then that one knows the other one, and then they can help with the other, right? So, or students working on one project in, one current example in South Coatesville, and then she wanted to take on a second. So we try to be careful with that. They're students first, but as long as, they tend to work 5 to 10 hours a week, and but my point in that is, again, building awareness within a community when a student does that, right? Takes on a couple of projects in the same community, and that network becomes even stronger. And that may work for a certain student that wants to learn more, and again, be more intentional in how to engage on a particular topic and or community.
Yeah, I guess Isabella, how, and this is the program you participated in, correct?
I think
This
mine
is
might be a little bit different. Mine's the
Slightly
RAM
different?
program, yeah.
Okay. So, but it's similar in the sense that you were working with a nonprofit in the community.
Mhm.
So, how does this type of program, being in school, how does it help you kind of round out your overall educational experience?
I think it teaches you so much more than what you can learn in a classroom. Because of course, like the classroom work is very important because you're learning, basic knowledge and important things. But being in the community and being able to do things that you would do in your future job are really important and teach you so much. I feel like I've learned a lot with working with F4. Um, and I wouldn't have gotten that in the classroom because we don't specifically learn as much about nonprofits in my schoolwork. So I think it's really helpful for students. And I didn't know about this other program either when I started school.
What would you tell your friends and other colleagues that are still in school right now about these types of programs? Would you
I would
recommend
tell them
them?
to look into it. Look into what your school has, or what else Westchester has. Because I've noticed these past couple of months is that like Westchester has so many resources for students, and different things they can get involved in. And especially also when you're helping your community at the same time, it's even better. You're helping other people while learning a lot yourself.
So well said. Dr. Dietrich, before we go to government affairs, take out your philosophy hat. What does this mean? Neighbor is not a geographic term, it's a moral concept.
right. Actually, I was interviewing one of the presidents in my doc when I was working on my dissertation, and she said, "What you're talking about." So she was, well, to keep the yes, the confidentiality of those whom I interviewed, but let's just say this leader of a higher ed entity shared this quote with me. And Joaquin Prince spoke, I believe, right before Dr. Martin Luther King in his I Have a Dream speech. So if you look at that, you will find this in part of that. So I extracted it to say that, neighbor isn't, so let's keep it where we are in Borough of Westchester. Neighbor doesn't mean, well, you live next door to me. It's not geographic. It's neighbor. I'll say, I'll go back to like we're human beings. It's you. It's right. And so how we treat one another, and that's why thus, it is a moral concept. It's who we are, how we treat one another, and that more human level of what it means to be a neighbor, not just more transactional and happenstance of living next to someone.
So well said. I love the theme of this, Isabella. This is really a great theme of this show today. Okay, so what is the government affairs? So that's also part of what you're working on.
Yes.
Can you expand
And
on that? What
sure.
they're doing?
Sure. And if you scroll down, I think you'll
Sure.
probably find there's like an advocacy resource center. That's relatively new. But again, it's a way of really helping encourage students and faculty to, well, there we go right there, learning the difference between advocacy and lobbying and what that engagement looks like. So being one of the institutions of the Pennsylvania state system of higher education, certainly every year we work to advocate on behalf of Westchester University as well as our sister institutions, right, on making sure that we're getting funding, for example, for this year that we can keep tuition frozen for an eighth year in a row. But really expanding it and being able to say, having, for example, we created a policy for put that public engagement policy, and what does that look like? But wanting to really encourage and support, if faculty members, staff members have relationships, how best to leverage them and the institutional awareness around that and responsibility around that. But also, hey, we have an office, the Office of External Relations, that can really help you. So for an example, if someone wants to bring a state or federal elected official into a classroom, that's fabulous, right? Like marvelous. But there's a way to do that. There's probably a logistics form. Who's going, where's the person going to park? Who's going to, do we have a gun-free policy? I mean, there are a good bit of details that if you haven't done it before, it's like, I just wanted the person to come to my class. What's all this? Also, I'm thinking, our College of Education and Social Work has a very strong interest in advocacy and two things I will say on that. They actually created an ad hoc committee, and I'll be working with them, I believe next week or the following, in helping them, what information do they need when they go to advocate? What does that look like? What can, if they're advocating on behalf of the university versus a private citizen? And the same thing goes for students, right? So one example that I would give by way of advocacy and impact, quite honestly, was relatively recently, our dean of our College of Education and Social Work and one of our student teacher candidates provided written and verbal testimony for the State House Education Committee, which we hosted on campus. And one of the things that was part of their advocacy was for a new student teacher stipend program. Well, that work we understood the feedback that we got was that was integral to helping to get that legislation passed. And that is now active legislation that helps, because to be clear, when students are doing their student teaching all day, all week, they're not getting paid for that, and they're taking classes. So for them to earn income is a bit challenging. Same thing, similarly for clinicals for other students, nursing students or what have you, right? So that legislation was really helpful. And again, current, and from last year to this year, the request in the budget is to double that funding because they didn't realize the demand was that high across the Commonwealth. For right, because we know there, we have heard in again recent time the teacher shortage, the challenge with diversity in the classroom, and how do we address that, right? So that was really, really valuable legislation. And the other thing institutionally that it did was we have a fund for unpaid internships, because we do try to make sure that opportunity is equitable and that students are able to fulfill the requirements, whether it's in their program or the service experiences that we were talking about, right? So the student teacher candidates were part of the application pool for the fund for unpaid internships. So when you pulled them out, then it enhanced opportunity for the other students to get funded through the fund for unpaid internships. The other piece is just yesterday through my office, I co-sponsored with the Student Government Association, and specifically a stellar student, the Legislative Affairs Senator, and we had a roundtable discussion, and it was called Student and Community Leaders Roundtable. And we had State Representative Kyle Mullins do a keynote, former philosophy student of mine, actually. Two other state representatives, the head of the Chester County Department of Human Services, the Deputy Chief of Staff and District Director for Congressman Houlihan, someone formerly from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and I could go on, right? But you get the point. And then students rotated every 15 minutes in having these conversations. And I think it's things like that. And I have ideas and plans in terms of how to enhance that engagement. But the more that we can do that, or getting into talking to a nutrition professor, and a couple of weeks ago, she was going to be actually at an ethics conference and filling in for her class. And they had a legislative assignment. They were going to have to identify a particular nutrition policy, related legislation, and write their legislator. And so to talk to them about that, but then more broadly about that engagement and who they are, and again, serving and leading in community and how to go about that. So again, I think you can understand from our conversation, even here today, my love for students and passion for that, and teaching being very natural. And so when I can more formally teach in terms of the classroom, I do and always welcome that. And at the same time, I've been really energized because students are the most inspiring whenever I can have opportunities like the event yesterday, like getting in front of a class, a community nutrition class, and really, I think too, the partnership that we can have with faculty, right? In supporting faculty in their work and engagement, and oftentimes with professional associations. And at the same time, right, helping them help the students because they may know a particular their content area, but they're not expecting, right? We're not expecting them to know how to help students advocate or right. And that's where we can work so well together.
Yeah, so well said. I love that. Working so well together. Well, this has been really, really great. The last thing that I wanted to kind of focus on was your work outside of Westchester in the community. So maybe we can touch upon your work with the food bank. I'm going to pull that up now. We've been working with the food bank. I actually started working with the food bank when they were on Horseshoe Pike in Downingtown, and they were started Larry Welsh and Bob McNeil.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing the food ministry in 2007. So they started, I think, in 2008 or 2009. So we had partnered the YMCA in Coatesville with the food bank for food drives. So I did that for a number of years when I was on the WISE board. But the food bank's always had a special place in my heart, and obviously they do so much for the county. I'd love to kind of hear how you got involved. You're on the board now, what you're doing, what the food bank's doing. I'd love to hear any information and insight around food insecurity.
No, I appreciate that. And it was, I believe initially it was really through Westchester University and working with, I serve on this advocacy committee. Another colleague joined me in that. And so we continue to meet regularly. And I had learned that there was a need. They were working to identify additional board members at the time. And I was working, talking with Andy Out, who heads
Yep.
the Chester County Food Bank. And so I basically would ask her, I was like, this might be a bit bold, but like I think you mentioned that you were looking for board members. Like, what if I'm interested? And so, you know, I said personally as well as professionally, in other words, yes, the university, but like otherwise, it's something that I feel very strongly about that I would love to be involved and see what I can do to help. And so that's really how that started, to be honest. And then, great individuals. So really love that work. Certainly in current times, there are a lot of challenges, and I wouldn't be able to, I think our team and Nick and Bessie it does a phenomenal job in his role working with elected officials and speaking of advocacy, right, around all of that. So, we could go there, but I'll keep it a bit
Yep.
more broad in terms of our time together and what your question was. I think, but certainly the different committees and personally serving on the advocacy committee has been really valuable, and the different strengths that people have. I think it's a strong representation across the community. And with the programming that they have, I mean, we can't begin to, or the backpack program in the summer, where I want to say it's going to be upward to 3,500 up to 5,000 by way of the summer program. So to be clear, when right students aren't in school and they have that need and would otherwise have food insecurity, not be fed like they would during the school year, to have a backpack program that demand is that high, right? But that could also be, hey, can somebody help and donate the backpacks? Because what does that look like when we're, and the sensitivities around that, or and the need has been increased as we've seen in our resource pantry on campus. It has really increased. And so we're fortunate that Chester County is such indeed an affluent county, but there is still a great need. And so I think finding the commonalities of how can we best address, get to the root of, right? And that's one of the things I really appreciate in particular about the food bank is looking at how trying to get to the root of it and empower and support people, right? Like the program that we have that, provides certification, helps people, go through that program and be able to then get employed, right? And I think that helps in addition to the donations and helping people in emergency situations, the more long-term approach. The other thing that the food bank has recently done through ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act funding through Chester County, is to create the Food Alliance. So the food bank serves as the facilitator for the Food Alliance, which really is, hey, let's bring everybody together, Phoenixville, Oxford, Coatesville, Westchester, in the various food cupboards, so that we're not, quote unquote, tripping over one another, right? And so I think that's relatively new, but again, bringing in resources from transportation, um, the partnership to end homelessness, and chambers of commerce, and having the leaders in the room to discuss some of these more broad community areas of need.
Yeah, I think that's something really neat, Dr. Dietrich, that the food bank has done is they've really tried to integrate with different organizations in society, trying to really focus on a community-based approach as opposed to just the distribution of food, collecting food, distributing food, which is important. It's really a lot of what we do. We get access to food, we procure it. A lot of it's food recovery that we do, and then we find partners that can utilize it day in and day out. They've kind of taken the concept of, and they still distribute. You can see how many community partners they have,
Absolutely.
but they've done a lot to create advocacy and really try to work and integrate with other organizations in the community, which falls right in line with your value system of uniting and not dividing. So I think it's really neat.
I appreciate that. And the university, it may be worth noting, is now a tier 1 partner of the Chester County Food Bank. So we're, strongly dependent and a strong partner. The institution, Westchester University is.
Yeah, it's amazing. Westchester really is doing a lot of good work for Chester County. I mean, really being a great leader on so many fronts. These student programs are phenomenal. I went to school at Villanova undergrad and I commuted, played football. I don't know, like I was trying to just make it through the day. I don't know how like Isabella's over here working and going to class. I mean, she's graduating early. It's just like amazing though that there's so many opportunities for the students to really excel. And then, the nice thing is you're not just giving them an opportunity, the students that is, you're helping to teach them so that they can make this community that we live in better for everybody.
Absolutely. Well said.
Yeah. So, Isabella, is there any questions for Dr. Dietrich that you'd like to kind of review as we kind of wrap up here?
I don't have any other questions, but thank you so much for joining us and telling us all about everything you do. This is my first time meeting you, and I've heard so much about you, so it was really interesting to learn more about you.
Well, thank you. It was an absolute pleasure. And I'm in Filano Hall. Come visit
I will.
to talk and help. And it sounds like you're quite a, ambitious, high energy young woman in and of your, in your own right. Anything I can do to help, I'd love to meet and talk
Thank
more and be
you.
supportive.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Well, the last word is yours, and then I'll close this out, Dr. Dietrich.
I would like to say thank you, first and foremost to both of you. And if there is a final note to leave, I will focus on character. And I think that should be at the core of who we are, what we're about, and certainly how we can help in our time here to develop others, particularly to serve and lead in community.
Beautiful. What a perfect note character. With that, I'd like to thank you for being with us today. As always, I'm your host, Derek Fiorenza, joined by,
Isabella Ambrosino.
and we are grateful today to have Dr. Dietrich on the show with us today. Please subscribe to us on Spotify and follow us on YouTube. We appreciate it. And together we will work on creating a world without hunger, with love and compassion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.